All right, everybody, come on in, come on in. Welcome back. It's been a couple of weeks. Welcome back to Let's Talk with Maggie and Lucy, where we believe the older women should teach the young, just like the late, great Kevin Samuel said. We like to come in here from time to time with you all and share our perspective as two older women with over 40 years of marriage experience. And we are here for the young women who are prioritizing marriage and family in their prime. So hopefully you can learn from us as we share with you all. So, Lucy, hello. Please greet the people and let us know what are we reacting to today.
Hi Maggie, hi everyone. It's funny when I send you these things, I don't go back and look at them. So now that I see this, I'm going, "Oh, now I remember that one." This one is a good one. This woman, again, this topic is always on my algorithm because that's one of my fascinations. I love to see how society has become what it is because of certain changes in during our eras and decades. And this woman speaks about how, unfortunately, wokeness is more of a woman type tendency than men, and men, unfortunately, have become. I think she says feminized because of following those needs that women are calling for. So this is going to be interesting. I would love to see your reaction and everybody else's thoughts on this because it's fascinating to me. My algorithm is always throwing curveballs at us, and this one is one of those.
We are in for a doozy, you all. So, yes, let me give you your two disclaimers, and then we're going to start with a little definition because I had to look up a couple things because I was like, this is new to me. Again, Lucy and I are here to promote marriage and family for the young women that want to do the same in their prime. If you want to be a professional dater, none of this applies. We cannot help you. This video is linked in the description if you want to watch it without our commentary. Feel free. I have requested to react to this one. This one is from a channel called Unheard. Never heard of this channel, but there's an author, a conservative author, and we are not political here. We are just hoping to learn from this and promote marriage and family. But this is a conservative author who wrote an article that apparently went nuclear. And so she was invited to explain herself in this interview. So this one's about 35 minutes. So what I did is I went ahead and got some timestamps here. So if you see me looking at my phone, I got some timestamps that we can play what she says to explain herself, and then we can give you all our take on it. As always, we love to hear what you have to say, so please share in the chat and we will bring it up on screen. So, two definitions that I want to start with. You're going to hear wokeness and you're going to hear feminization in this interview. So, I'm going to share my screen because I looked these up because I thought I knew what they meant and you may know what they mean, but just for the context of what we're going to be talking about, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page. Okay, so let's start with wokeness. Let me go over, let's see, make sure I'm sharing. All right, that's the article. We're going to share this one. So I'm not going to read this to you all. You all can read, but basically, wokeness has changed from the original definition that I knew it to be. I knew it to be originating from the African American community to talk about, like you can see here, racial inequality or anything of that sort. But I didn't know this. Maybe you all did. I had to ask Mr. President. It has been commandeered by the feminists to now talk about anything that is an injustice for their social and political views. All right. So when we talk about wokeness, if you're old like me, you may be thinking of the original wokeness, but this is wokeness as feminists use the term. All right. So I just wanted to go ahead and start by saying that. You're also going to hear her use a term called feminization. And you know, Lucy and I believe in femininity, elegance, and etiquette. That's what we teach in the finishing school that we just wrapped up. However, that is not what feminization is. So I'm just going to share because I had to look this one up too so that we are all on the same page. Feminization is about the process of making something more, they're using the term feminine, but I'm going to say more woman friendly. All right, because you will hear, and in my opinion, I don't think anything we're going to hear is about femininity, but wokeness as it applies to the feminists and feminization as it applies to making things more women centric, or as Kevin used to call it, gynocentric. Okay, so I just wanted to establish that. And then we're going to get into this interview. So I am going to play the first clip, and she is talking about her definition of wokeness, and then we will react to that. All right, so let's go in here. We're going to go to the video. This is Miss Helen, and
rules of group dynamics. Our institutions changed radically in 2020. Wokeness really did mark a significant departure in how our institutions function.
A rolling back or a reversal of the increased presence of women in the judiciary, in politics, in the legal profession, in the scientific community, in the academy even, would basically result in a much diminished voice for women in the institutions that wield the most power. Are you comfortable with that outcome?
In so many ways, I depend on the institutions of society is an obstacle to that, then I think I have an interest in seeing that feminization rolled back. We have lost something if history departments become feminized, when parliamentary debate becomes feminized, when all of these things become feminized. The institutions just don't work as well.
all right, so let us unpack that so you all can see a little bit, and then we're going to get into more of this. So that is Helen, that is the author, and I would love to know what you all think in the chat and how you all define, how you all define wokeness. But you can see that this is going to be more of an academic debate. So she is an author, and she is arguing against the direction that certain areas are becoming more feminized. She is noticing the change, and I think the change is all around us. And you all can let us know if you think it's a good thing or if it's not a good thing. But I'm going to take the stand on, we can't put our heads in the sand and say that this isn't happening. Things aren't changing. It's up for you all to decide if it helps what your goals are or not. But I have some opinions about this we're going to get into, but I just wanted to lay the groundwork. What would you say, Lucy?
I got nothing to say. You presented it perfectly. I want to thank you for pulling up the definitions for feminization and wokeness because, yeah, things have changed. And one of the things that we notice in language is that they keep changing language according to what works best for one effort. So again, it's important to remember that.
Absolutely. All right. So let's go back in. And the next section is just an introduction about who Helen is, in case, like me, you all didn't know who she was. So we're just going to learn a little bit about who she is and how she got to be interviewed in this article. All right. So let's go back over here. I'm going to fast forward to 145. Okay.
The Great Feminization, which argued roughly that the woke era, wokeism, is not just an accident of politics and timing, it is all to do with gender and the increasing prevalence of women in the workplace and in influential institutions. Of course, we thought we had to try and get her here on the show to talk it through with us. So Helen, welcome to Unheard.
Thanks for having me, Freddie.
So let's just lay it out.
All right, I'm just going to skip to the next section. I think you all understand the groundwork here. She's going to talk about wokeness. And so I'm going to let this next section play for about a minute and some, and then I'm going to bring you all's comments. And we're going to talk about, like Lucy said, how this term has been commandeered to suit the people that want to use it. So I think that's the big takeaway. Sometimes things can be appropriated by people who want to use it in a way that suits them. So just be very mindful that happens all of the time. All right, let's go back in and listen to what she defines wokeness as. And that's at the 3-minute mark.
clicked into place for me. Wokeness is feminization. It is feminine patterns of behavior and group dynamics applied to institutions that had previously operated by more masculine rules of group dynamics. And to check this hypothesis against the facts, all you have to do is look at the demographics of various professions and institutions. Many of them tipped over from being majority male to majority female in the decade or even the 5 years leading up to wokeness. Law schools, for example, tipped from being majority male to majority female in 2016. The New York Times tipped over to being majority female in its staff in 2018. Medical schools, the white-collar workforce overall, just so many of the basic bedrock institutions of society demographically feminized right around the same time that they developed the, I would say, pathologies of wokeness. And so the fact that what wokeness entails so resembles feminine group dynamics, that can't be a coincidence. So that's my theory. That
All right, so let's take a moment and unpack this. She's giving a little bit of background on how we got here. And again, it'll be up to you all just to decide if this is better or worse for you. But for me, I think we need to start by understanding and accepting that there are some fields that predominantly have been male. There are some fields that have been predominantly female. You can argue whether that's good or bad. It just is. And this, for me, goes to the crux of the argument. You hear me always saying, we are not equal. We are equally valued, but we are very different. A man is a man and a woman is a woman. So if you want marriage and family, I think understanding those roles and why we're not partners and just interchangeable Lego parts, it's actually really important to where our relationships are going, our families are going, our communities are going, our society is going. So she's saying in this section that as these institutions have become more feminized, which means more woman-friendly, wokeism, as it is understood now, has kind of exploded to align with that feminization of these institutions. So change is happening or has happened. We'll see how that applies moving forward. What would you add, Lucy?
I love how you interpret all that information because I listen to it. I understand it. I know, but it's hard for me to explain it as eloquently as you're doing it. So that's why I had to share this with you, because I knew that you were going to put it in the appropriate words for the public to understand.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, so let's go back in. So that was the section on wokeness. Now we're really going to get into the meat of it now. All right, so the next section that I've timestamped, she's going to talk about how men and women disagree. All right, so let's get out of the political sphere and let's just think about human nature. If you're a man or a woman, if you've had an argument with a man or a woman, see if you can relate to this. This section is about 2 minutes and I'm going to let it play uninterrupted. And then we're going to talk about the disagreement. All right, let's go back in. And this is at 4 minutes and 30 seconds.
Of cancel culture, those kind of things? Or which parts of woke do you think are particularly feminine?
The one that I encountered first in my own career, because I argue for a living, is the idea that disagreement is a personal affront. That if you disagree with me, I take offense at that. Now, for me, my belief has always been that if I disagree with you, that's a sign of respect. If I'm arguing with you, that's how I show respect. That conflict is not necessarily something that should be minimized. Sometimes conflict is a good thing. Certainly in terms of debate, rational debate, conflict is the essence of that. What we saw during the woke era was this new idea that if you're disagreeing with someone's position, you are questioning their humanity or invalidating their lived experience. Wokeness was a way of shutting down conflict rather than living with conflict. And that's a pattern that psychologists have observed in differences between men and women. And to clarify something that's caused a lot of people a lot of confusion and trouble in evaluating this argument for themselves, it's not so much differences in individual men and women in terms of their tastes, but group dynamics, how male predominant groups behave versus groups that are majority female. It would not be fair to, or it would be reductive to say that men like argument and women are more conflict averse. That may be true in general terms, but there are plenty of exceptions. There are plenty of women who like conflict and plenty of men who can't stand it. But when you're talking about groups that are majority male versus groups that are majority female, it is a lot more consistent and fair and true to the facts to say that, look, groups that are majority female tend to operate by these HR type rules of you can't ruffle anybody's feathers and you have to lather any criticism in layers and layers of compliments and you have to avoid conflict and be more consensus based. And at the level of the group, that does tend to apply.
Because it's a little.
All right, y'all. So let's get in here. And I know this is a lot, but you can turn on your nerd brain with me and sink our teeth into this one. So she talked about the way men and women disagree. And again, for me, what's so fascinating is how what Kevin Samuel said just still lives on to be true. Do you all remember when he used to say, "You're not that special snowflake," right? When you think about the group at large, that is where the scales start to be tipped. We're not talking about one-offs here. So ladies, in relationship with men, in communication with men, in conflict with men, this is why your argument of, I know somebody, not all, or all of these things that say, well, that one time at band camp, that doesn't make or break the argument. So we talk about the difference between how men conflict and how women conflict, right? I have seen this. If you have boys or brothers or anything, how many times have we seen men go at it toe to toe and then, may the best man win, right? Where does that term come from? They shake hands and then they go off and work together. Women, we know if you offend me, we're not speaking for however long. How long does it take us to come around? Why should you care? One, like I said, for me, this is really about understanding the differences, accepting that there are differences. Then when you parlay that to the institutions that have now gone from mostly male to mostly female, the feminization, we are going to bring those group behavior dynamics with us. So if you think those institutions that have operated a certain way, good or bad, your choice, that were predominantly male, when they become predominantly female, they will look very different. Full stop. What would you add, Lucy?
I love that you brought Kevin Samuels. Look, I wrote in my notes, KS. And remember how they tried so hard to cancel him? It's because they couldn't take the directness of his statements. And, this is the way he saw things. Whereas we women, we take everything personally. We take everything in the emotion. And that's why, relationships are so, it's beautiful to see when we figure each other out and how well we can work together. But it's also awful to see how some relationships get completely devastated because of the incredibly different way of communication we have as women and men.
I love this. So I always think about what we share with you all, how this can be helpful. Ladies, if you're in a relationship with a masculine man or you want to be in a relationship with a masculine man, drop all of this name calling and labeling and diagnosing. He's not a narcissist. He's not controlling. He's just direct and to the point. A man can have a conflict with you about the facts and they say, okay, let's move on. And they really are ready to move on. So all these little games that we play as women, if you find yourself not being able to last the test of time with relationships, maybe it could be that you are not understanding how to communicate and properly conflict with a man. All right, so the next section that I have here is on conflict. So this one is about 2.5 minutes. So I want you all to listen, and then we're going to discuss how we conflict differently and what implications that could have. All right, let's go back in.
There's a different approach between men and women. Talk us through that.
That's true. One book that I happened upon as I was pursuing this line of inquiry for myself was a book called Warriors and Worriers by a psychologist named Joyce Benenson. And I tend dispositionally to be skeptical of evolutionary psychology arguments. I personally do bristle at the idea that what I do and how I behave has anything to do with cavemen or our ancestors on the savannah. But in this case, I think her argument resonated with me because it reflected things I've seen and experienced myself. She said that men developed rules of interpersonal behavior adapted to war and conflict with other tribes, whereas women developed rules of behavior consistent with conflict within the tribe and with particularly their female rivals. The example of that difference that I think clicks most easily for people, or at least that I find that most ordinary people today recognize most easily, is that men are much more likely than women to have a concept of the honorable opponent, to be able to fight someone bitterly, even to the death in war, and yet at the end of it, be able to shake their hand and say, I respect you, and say, good game, fellow, and return to some kind of basic status quo of, yes, we were fighting to the death a moment ago, but I nevertheless respect you and honor you, and I'm willing to operate within rules of conflict, and the conflict's over, and now that it's done, we can be friends again. Women tend to be slower to reconcile. I was surprised but pleased to discover that this is true even in primate species, that when they observe the behavior of chimpanzees, that females who get into conflict are slower to reconcile with their female rivals than males. I don't know, there must be something to it if even chimps are doing it. But women tend to not have that attitude of good game, let's shake hands and put bury this conflict, bury the hatchet. Women tend to simmer and continue conflicts indefinitely. And Joyce Benenson offered her evolutionary psychology reasons for why that might be the case in the difference between how men and women handle conflict. But whether or not her explanation for why it's true is valid or not, I think that most people would accept that it is true.
All right, another one to sink our teeth into. So you all can either object or concur. I find it fascinating when she said that men are more likely to deal with conflict outside of the group, whereas we women are more likely to deal with conflict inside of the group. Let's bring it to the modern time. Men are more likely to deal with conflict outside of the home. Women are more likely to deal with conflict inside of the home. So again, argue if you want to, but ladies, if you are having difficulty maintaining a relationship, do you understand now why men might say, I don't want to come home to that? They're already dealing with the conflict out there. And I love what she said about the honorable opponent. I don't know why I've gone down the rabbit hole of Viking shows, but I find it fascinating the way fights used to be, where it was almost like set up to where, like she said, even if it was a fight to the death and someone died, they died an honorable death as a warrior. Am I saying we need to go back to medieval times? No, but human nature has not changed in all these hundreds and thousands of years. So if you are a chaotic woman, if you are a woman that not only has your man worrying about what's going on outside of the home, outside of the relationship, but then when he comes home, he's got to deal with you and your mouth and your complaints and your nitpicking and everything else, maybe could that be a reason why you don't have a relationship with the kind of man that you admire and respect? So how can you fix that? Like Lucy says, we need to be an asset. Ladies, if we know our nature is to stir up trouble and to, cause derision where there isn't any, maybe we can work on being, you know what? Don't worry, I got the home fires burning. The last thing you got to worry about is out here. I'm here to be a support system so you can go out there and conquer, and then we all benefit. What would you add, Lucy?
And it's incredible how she pulled up that author, Warriors and Worriers, because we as women, we tend to worry about things that really don't even apply to us, and we can take it to the millionth scenario where men are looking at things. This is what's happening now. These are the steps that we're going to take to fix things. And that's where it's important for us women to understand that it's in nature. Men deal with things in a very different way. I always put my husband and me in when we have arguments, when he says, when we got to have an argument, it's over and done with. And he moves on and he does his own little thing. He goes to do the tractor back there. And then me, I'm going through the scenario, thinking about things that he said and some of the things. And again, and this is the kind of thing that I watch just to allow me to self-reflect and say, Lucy, come on now. The guy, he resolved it. There's no reason for you to continue pushing the topic because it's over for him. So again, it's for us women to, when a man says, no, it's done, we're done with, to stop. We need to start to continue nagging them about something that for them, it was a done and over with deal.
I love that. And what Lucy said is a self-reflection. Ladies, this is on us. This is up to us. Now, you can argue, that's fine. Nobody cares. But if you really want to make progress, if you wonder how those of us who have been in relationships for decades last the test of time, we correct ourselves. We don't put it on our men to say, I'm not telling you again. They don't even want to have to tell us the first time, right? So especially if you have a man of a certain caliber, he's got all these things going on. The last thing he wants to deal with is Mr. President says, we've got this movie just playing in our head. It can be the farthest thing from the truth, but because it's in our head, it is the gospel. And that is the hill that we're going to die on, and oftentimes our relationships die with it. Another thing he always used to tell me, old Southern man, he'll just sit back and say, that's why girl groups never stay together. And I'm like, what are you talking about? But if you think about it, it's true. The Temptations, the Beach Boys, they're still touring with their, new replacement hips or whatever, well into their 70s and 90s. How many times do girl groups or girl trips or girl things usually fall by the wayside? Because what? We don't know how to conflict and just let it be. We don't know how to fight fair. We don't know how to get offended and get over it and not keep dragging the same thing over and over. So again, this is just our species. And I think if you kind of get over yourself and realize this is just who we are as women, once you know that, and it's not you against me, we can decide, like Lucy said, if we want to self-reflect or if we just want to stay in our hurt feelings and stay single, because that's an option too, right? I'm gonna tell you one time. Y'all know over here, Mr. President told me, I'm gonna tell you one time in a row and let you figure it out. I was like, who is he talking to? I love it, but who is he talking to? Okay, so we talked about wokeness. We've talked about the difference between how we disagree. And then we talked about the difference between how men and women conflict. So we're going to go to the next clip about some other differences between women and men. And again, remember, the red thread is when you extrapolate this out to all of these institutions that are now becoming feminized, all of this behavior comes with it. So ask yourself, is that good or bad? Is that helpful or not helpful for the world that you want to live in? All right, let's go back in. We're going to go to 10-minute mark.
Like conflict, and women are conflict averse. Well, that is true in some senses, but it would be a mistake to infer from that women don't fight or that women don't engage in conflict. They do, very much so, sometimes more than men. It's a difference in the way that conflict plays out. I referred a moment ago to the concept of the honorable opponent and standing up and fighting someone to the best of your ability and then accepting the outcome of that conflict, however it might go. That is the thing that wokeness is missing. Instead of, if you're a wokester and you've identified somebody in your university department or in your business who has stepped outside the lines or violated the taboos of wokeness, what you do is you don't do what masculine rules of conduct would indicate, which would be to fight that person or dispute that person, say, I disagree with you and here's why, let's have an argument. Instead, you ostracize that person and say, I can't even believe you just said that. Wow. And shut down conversation and exclude that person from even the realm of things you're willing to debate. That, to me, was the biggest pathology of wokeness. It made it impossible to discuss any topic on which wokeness developed taboos, which turned out to be quite a lot of things that are very important for a democratic society to be able to debate. So yes, of course, wokeness is very much engages in conflict. It just does it in what is, to me, a toxic and unhealthy way.
All right, ladies. Whew. Let's get back in here and talk about this one. So she said, both men and women have conflict. So are we telling you to suffer in silence? No. Are we telling you to never speak up? No. That's not this, all right? Use your common sense. But the way that we do it, welcome to the sisterhood. Welcome to cancel culture. Welcome to how many of you all have lost friends and relationships because people vote differently, cook differently, dress differently, date differently, whatever. So what she's saying that as women, if we disagree with somebody, we can't just argue, or we don't just argue on the merit. I disagree with you because of these reasons. Now it is all of you that I cannot stand, and all of you must be disposed of. And to me, that's a very juvenile way to have any type of disagreement. You're not going to work well in any group environment or work environment, let alone a relationship, if you can't stick to the facts. And this is something that Kevin was so masterful at when women would call in. And you all know he would stay on them about that same question. Even something as simple as, what was your weight the last time you got on the scale? I'm not telling you to say the number, but y'all remember how we used to tap dance all around? Oh, I don't know. Come on. So again, this is just about some differences between women and men. And you can ask yourself if you recognize any of these behaviors, and is it helping you get the outcomes that you want? And as institutions are becoming more women-led and women-driven and more feminized, what does that mean for all of us? What would you add, Lucy?
Yeah, and in addition to that, this is not about being performative, because you can pretend to be somebody that understands how men work. It's about accepting that's who they are and appreciating them for who they are. So again, we work in a more of a passive aggressive way of doing things. You know, the gossiping, the smearing of somebody that you don't like with other friends, and making them look bad because you had this whatever argument you had with them. I see it in HR, how a woman can accuse a man of something, and HR doesn't have to tell the man who was the accuser, you know, and he has to go through all that stuff. And that is a very scary concept to accept, because there's no accountability. The woman, you want accountability from the man, but you don't want accountability from the woman. And that is just absolutely insane.
Yeah, we're going to go into that in the next section, but I just want to take a pause, and especially for the young women whose heads might be reeling. Like Lucy said, this is not about saying what is better or worse. It's about saying what is and making an informed decision. So in relationships, because that's where my heart is, in marriage and families. So ladies, we need to understand that our men are who they are by nature, just like we are who we are by nature. And if you have a good man, don't cause confusion and throw the baby out with the bathwater because he spoke to you sharply one time and you cannot believe that, he was so direct with you. So the decision is, okay, I always like to use myself as an example. You all know I can speak extemporaneously. Men don't like that. So if that means I need to think before I approach my man and give him all of the color commentary that he didn't ask for, if I am going to need him to make a decision, or I'm requesting something, or I need to inform him, I get straight to the facts in the beginning. And then if he wants the detail, I can give him the detail if it's needed or not needed, or I can just save that for my girlfriends who want to know all of the tea. But that is an intentional act that you can do to put the relationship over your feelings. And I'm just going to say this because I can feel the women saying, well, do we always? And it's not fair. Please believe the men that love you and care for you, they are going well out of their way to treat you with kid gloves. If you saw the way men spoke to each other, my God, if you saw the way fathers check sons, or you all can only imagine, especially, you know, what's gone on in my family, what I have seen, it is, if men treated us the way men treat each other, we would be a puddle on the floor. So when a man loves you, they know, and they're taking time to soften some of that and give us some of those warm and fuzzies that we need as women. That's what makes a relationship last the test of time. You're both giving, you're both adjusting, you're not keeping score, you're not keeping points, you're not trying to, you know, compete against each other, because we're not partners. We're man and woman, and we're very different, but we are better together. Okay, so now we're going to go into the next section. I'm going to let this play for about 2 minutes. Lucy just talked about the fear that men can lose it all when a woman makes an accusation. And she has an example of a man named Larry Summers. Didn't know who he was. He was a Harvard professor. And I'll let her explain what happened to him. So that's at the 12-minute mark. Okay.
Tell us about what happened to him and why you think it's relevant here.
Larry Summers was the president of Harvard University, which made him one of the 10 most powerful people in America. He was extremely well connected. He was an extremely illustrious and well-respected economist, very academically capable as a scholar on his own terms. He was also very politically connected. He had served in the Clinton administration in the 90s. Really just a towering pillar of the establishment. He was invited in that capacity to speak to a conference on women's representation in science. And he said at the beginning of his remarks, you know, when the organizer invited me to come here, I said, I've got 2 versions of this speech. I can give you the nice one, where I tell you all the great things that Harvard is doing to improve female representation in science departments, or I can give you a genuine, sincere, off-the-cuff rumination on why I think women remain underrepresented in science. I can give you the real talk. I can, you know, the fuzzy bureaucratic one or the real one. And he said he wanted the real one, so here it is. And he proceeded to give what was actually fairly mainstream assessment of male and female differences when it comes to the hard sciences. He said that men are more likely to be represented out at the tail end of the ability bell curve. So you have more men than women who are way in the top 0.1% of scientific ability. And that also women tend to be less interested in these systematizing scientific topics than men. So even women who are extremely intellectually capable tend, as a matter of taste, to be more interested in more humanities and personal focused fields. There were some women in the audience when Larry Summers gave this talk and made those points.
I mean, it's worth saying, I'm sorry to interrupt, Helen, it's just,
yes,
it almost feels nostalgic, doesn't it, to think of a world where you could wade into the question of the heritability of IQ or skills or talents in different fields.
All right, I just want to pause here because this one blew my mind, and I just want to make sure you all are feeling the gravity of what was just said before we hear the outcome. So this is a Harvard professor. Think whatever you want to about academia, but this man was at the top of his professional trajectory. He was invited to speak somewhere. How many men have been asked, give me your honest opinion. Tell me what you think. No, I really want to know. How many men have stepped on that landmine? So a Harvard professor who has credentials on paper, invited to speak to a group of women. He didn't, make his soapbox and say, you're going to listen to me. They asked him to come. Number 2. Number 3, It was a controversial topic, not really controversial, but it was about women in advanced, I think, sciences. And I'm passionate about this because I have a chemistry degree. I'll come back to that in a moment. And he said, do you want the, what is it? Not the PG version, but when something is, there's a word when something is like non-offensive. Do you want the, easy version, or do you want me to tell it to you straight? And the guest said, tell us it straight. So he goes on to talk about his perception of this. And in a nutshell, she's talking about advanced fields. There are more men in advanced fields than women. Argue me down if you want to, but if you think about the bell curve, what I'm thinking about, even take fields that a lot of women are in. For example, cooking. There are probably more executive chefs that are male than women. Take another field like healthcare. There are probably more neurosurgeons that are men than women. Am I saying it's better or worse? No, I'm just saying it is. So he's talking about in the 0.1% of fields in advanced sciences, there are more men there. And he starts to talk about some of the reasons why even women who are capable, ladies, if we're honest with ourselves, usually we're just not as interested, especially as we age. This is why I'm always warning very headstrong, career-driven modern women in your youth, because I was just like you. And you're going to get to a point where you're going to find happiness in nesting. Not all, but most women, especially as they age, we take a liking to more softer, less stressful careers than men do. So we'll continue on, but Lucy, what would you add?
You explained it incredibly well. And it goes back to the part where she talked about men being more honorable. He asked, do you want the sugar-coated version or do you want the straight to the fact version? So again, it's going to be interesting, the result of that option that they chose after.
Thank you, y'all. I was thinking about politically correct. So, okay, remember that. We're going to go back in and think about what happened. A Harvard professor was invited to speak about why there are more men in advanced fields. And he said, do you want the politically correct version or do you want the off the record version? And they said, give it to us straight. All right, let's see what happened to him.
And not realize that this is an unexploded bomb. I mean, anyone in the years since would be tiptoeing around and would just steer clear of it. But there was Larry Summers in the golden days of 2005, just thinking he'd riff it.
Well, one of the most important aspects of this story is that he thought he was off the record. He was off the record. And the rules of off the record say that you can't take quotes from somebody's off the record speech and hand them to a journalist. But one of the classic differences between men and women is that men are more likely to be invested in rules, whereas women are more likely to focus on the outcome that they want, that they think is going to be best, and kind of fudge the rules to get their way to the outcome that they want. And that's, whether or not you accept that's true of men and women in general, certainly in this case, the women ignored the off-the-record rule, took Larry Summers' quotes to a feminist journalist, and stirred this up into a massive national scandal. And the thing that was so dismaying for those of us who remember watching it unfold at the time is that these women who were trying to get Larry Summers fired, and as they eventually did not offer any arguments. They did not try and say that what Larry Summers said was wrong on the facts. What they said in the quotes that they gave to the New York Times was, I was so offended I couldn't even breathe. I had to leave or I would have passed out. And I'm sitting there thinking, you're not really beating the allegations that you're emotional rather than rational, ladies. Feminist hysteria managed to unseat one of the most powerful people in the United States from one of the most valuable positions simply on the basis of being offended without even trying to argue that what he had said was wrong.
So by that
So this Harvard professor was eventually fired after being invited to speak about a topic about women. And they said, tell it to us straight. And not because what he said was wrong, but because of how it made them feel. To me, that is such a tragedy. And this is why, ladies, those of you all that are complaining, men don't approach, men aren't putting any effort, I don't understand, I feel invisible, all these things that are happening. Because to me, I always relate it to the relationship space. Can you understand? And I don't know this man, and I'm not taking any sides here, but whatever it took for him to get to Harvard professor, that is an accomplishment that probably took him decades to get wherever he is. Any man who has built something, it is so much that they risk dealing with us. So again, if you want to be in a relationship with a man, do you show up as somebody that is a risk, or do you show up as somebody that can be trusted and that can hear something that may hurt, but you're not going to have that feminist hysteria that she talks about, that now, not only am I going to disagree with you, I'm going to shut you down, I'm going to cancel you, and I'm going to get you fired and probably smear your reputation. To me, that's just a tragic example. And I know this isn't the only case, but ladies, this is part of the reason why men are giving you one opportunity to try and get this right. And if you show up as somebody that could ruin everything that they work for, you'll just find yourself perpetually single. What would you add, Lucy?
Yes, and that is heartbreaking. What that story reminds me of, or gives me the picture of, a woman just setting up fire to a house and completely destroying the man's house, completely destroying the man over something that was factual, but they didn't like it. And again, that goes back to, we're not being honorable. If you say we're going to take it as it is, we got to take it as it is. And unfortunately, most women, all of us, we are known to change our minds all the time. And the men that love us, they understand us, they give us grace, they love us for that. But again, we have to be very, very careful about asking someone to tell us how it is, and then all of a sudden, because it doesn't go with what we believe, now we destroy his life completely. That is absolutely insane, and it's just lack of honorability, or you just don't have character when it comes to that. I can't it's hard to believe.
Yeah, I'm seeing you all in the comments. You all are fired up on this one. World Class says that this is why we don't tell them anything. So again, ladies, you can decide if this is the hill you're going to die on, or if you really want a relationship that's going to last the test of time. We have to, one, understand that we are different and how this can play out. Here's something that you can do, low hanging fruit, because some of you all are saying, well, I wouldn't do that. Well, not all. Well, like Mr. President said, until the good ones start speaking up, everybody's going to get it. And even if you're one of those I wouldn't do that kind of women, we are all getting lumped into this sisterhood, which means we have to overperform and we have to demonstrate that we are worth keeping around, because men are the ones who control relationships. Argue me down if you want to, but we have to demonstrate that we can handle news that might be a little bit constructive criticism. We have to say, well, you know what? I did ask you. Next time I won't ask. Because I'm telling you, when I ask Mr. President something and he does this right here, you really want to know? I think long and hard before I open my mouth and say, am I ready for this? And I'm going to be honest with y'all. Sometimes the answer is no, I'm not ready to hear it. And that's just true. But that comes from self-awareness, because if I'm feeling like I could crack right now, it's not worth it. All right. So remember, we're talking about institutions that are becoming more feminized, and we bring all of this behavior with us and can ruin somebody because we asked him a question and he told the truth. All right, so the next section we're going to go into is the response, I think, to what happened to Larry Summers. And again, I see Phyllis is taking sides. I'm not taking sides. I'm just sharing with you all, this is what's happening. So the next section is about a minute. Let's go back in.
going back all the way to Phyllis Schlafly, took gender differences as their starting point and then asked, given that these are the differences between men and women, what are likely to be the changes in our institutions? How is this likely to play out if institutions tip to being majority female? The important thing about the article I wrote and the position I am taking is that I did not take gender differences as my starting point. I began with the observation that our institutions changed radically in 2020. Wokeness really did mark a significant departure in how our institutions function. So given this huge, unprecedented, otherwise inexplicable, massive social change called wokeness, what could possibly be the explanation for that? So I didn't start with gender differences and saying men and women are different, therefore I think more ladies is going to be a disaster. I started with observing a disaster and asking what could possibly explain it. And I think that the most simple explanation is feminization.
Yeah, and you come up with some quite convincing dates here. Law schools became majority female in 2016. The New York Times, as you mentioned, became majority female in 2018. Medical schools became majority female in 2019. And overall, the college-educated workforce became majority female in 2019. A lot of people, I think, women or men, would hear those statistics and feel like that was something to celebrate. They might say, okay, maybe the way that these institutions work has changed. Maybe there are some negative aspects to that. But overall, it's a positive because it means greater participation. It means they will reflect the communities they're serving better, etc. You know what the arguments are. Do you also see some positives in the additional presence of women in the workplace?
It depends on the field. I think there are some fields that are very much enhanced by female representation. I am basing my judgments of whether increasing feminization is a good thing or a bad thing based not on speculation about how I think women tend to be, but on observation about how increasing feminization has affected these institutions so far. In the case of the field of law, that is one area where I see the areas of law that are most female dominated, including law revolving around sexual assault and the Me Too movement. And in the case of campus courts to adjudicate cases of sexual assault, the so-called Title IX courts that arose under President Obama, that is kind of a sort of perfect experiment. That's a legal system designed by women according to feminist principles. And I observe how those courts played out in practice. And I think, well, gosh, these Title IX courts for sexual assault on college campuses were just railroading a lot of innocent guys who got caught up in ambiguous situations. So there were many injustices committed by these courts. They don't seem to have the safeguards that I think are really important. These were courts designed to believe women and protect women, and yet they tended to do more harm than good. And then during the Me Too movement, what we saw, certainly in America, was many of those same legal principles and habits from the campus courts that existed on universities being applied to actual legal cases of sexual assault prosecutions in the real grown-up courts, things like the Harvey Weinstein trial and all the rest of it. And there was a tendency in those Me Too cases, certainly in how they were covered in the press, and even a little bit how they were dealt with in courts of law, that seemed to me to be inching closer and closer to the problems and the pathologies that were observable in the Title IX courts for sexual assault on college campuses. So that's a case where I am just observing as a fact about the world that I can see with my own eyes, that increasingly feminized legal areas or types of courts tend to function in ways that I don't like, that I think are bad. To be clear, there are some people who thought the Title IX courts on college campuses were great, who thought they were pillars of feminism. They were really sad when President Trump got rid of them. But I think they were bad. I think they were kangaroo courts. And I think if our actual legal system comes to resemble them, that will be really bad for America and for anybody who has to live under the rule of law. So
all right. right. So let's unpack this one. Again, I am not a legal scholar. I'm not an attorney. I don't even play one on YouTube. But I did want to go back to, she had a screenshot up there. I'm going to see if I can go back to that. If you all saw, like I saw, just some statistics, and hopefully we can agree on statistics. Whether you like it or not is up to you. Whether you think it's good or not is up to you. Law schools have become majority female. All right. What else did she say? Medical schools have become majority female. College educated workforce, majority female. I'll even say, even college campuses, aren't there more women enrolled in college than men? As a woman, like I said, I want what's best for all of us. I am a very passionate boy mom, and it breaks my heart to see how, as institutions have become more feminized, her words, I think the pendulum has swung so hard and maybe overcorrected, and men are now getting kicked in the teeth. And it scares me what the men that we all know and love are going out into the world to try and wade through and make keep their reputation intact again. So if you have a man who's giving you an opportunity and taking you seriously, I think you need to take him seriously and hold on and work together, because I keep saying it's going to get worse before it gets better. This thing is going to take time to correct itself, but we can't argue the statistics. And even if you just, ladies, look around the institutions that you are in, when you see more women enter a space, is it better or is it not better? What would you add, Lucy?
And that's now how we're seeing a lot of the young men are going for trade schools, because trade schools, that's their strength. They're going to work with their hands. They're going to figure things out. And again, as a woman that has been in really bad situations, those men that are doing that work are the ones that are going to save the world, not the intellectual ones, not these women that want to have the six-figure man surgeon. First of all, we're living in delusion, because not we don't have millions of surgeons and vampires and pirates and all of those people that we read in those novels that women buy. But that's why they're focusing more on the trade schools, because they don't have that nonsense of these women looking for, to get them into trouble, even though not all women do. But there are women that unfortunately are not emotionally stable enough to differentiate between a guy being a jerk and a guy doing something more, that is considered, essay, or, the bad part. So again, it's sad, but I'm hoping that the younger generations of women start understanding that, these differences, it's nature, and we are better together, understanding and accepting that we see the world differently for a reason.
I couldn't agree more. And this is why the intact family is so important. And this is why we need men raising boys, and we need girls to see real men and how they operate, how they handle conflict, how they deal with the ups and downs of life, and not your bitter, single, older mothers, aunties, or whatever telling you what men are. No, you need to actually experience what men are. So that's why I always say, for the young women in their prime, now is the opportunity for you to work on those relationship skills. If you want to be a professional dater for 20 years and then you look up at 35 or 45 and you're like, okay, now I'm tired of being out here on my own, I really want somebody to sail into the second half with, you're going to be ill prepared. There's a couple other segments. There's one on politics, and then there's one on individual versus the group that I want to play and we'll react to, and then wrap it up. Are you okay with that, Lucy?
Yes.
Okay. So the next section, and we're not political here, but I think there's something we can learn. So I've got a timestamp for another minute and a half, and then one more after that. So we're going to go to 2420. Okay.
To the realm of politics. And I'm sure you know that we could not get to the end of this conversation without mentioning Margaret Thatcher at least once.
It is her
It was
100th
inevitable.
birthday this past week, so appropriate.
I think one result of the increasing feminization of politics is a decline in legislative or parliamentary repartee, parliamentary heckling. It used to be quite common in your legislature in Great Britain for people in the House of Commons to heckle each other and shout at each other and have rude one-liners. And really, the parliamentary debate was an art. And I think most people would agree that that art has declined. Some of that, I believe, is a tendency to adopt feminine modes of rhetoric, which are less friendly to the sort of conflict-oriented repartee that characterized parliamentary debate in the early part of the 20th century. Now, Margaret Thatcher, among her many strengths, was parliamentary repartee. She could take heckling with the best of them. She would not break down and cry or give an emotional response when somebody shouted something from across the other side. So we can't say that women are bad at parliamentary debate or that they can't deal with or can't handle heckling, because Margaret Thatcher was quite good at it. Nevertheless, if you have a parliament that is majority female, the House of Commons is not majority female at this time, not yet. It probably will be someday. But if you have a parliament in which women have 1/3 representation or greater, your style of debate will become more feminized, and that will be less friendly to the kind of debate that used to occur. So there's just a huge difference between saying any individual woman, like Margaret Thatcher, might be talented in certain male or historically male fields of endeavor. That's fine. But if your entire legislature becomes predominantly female, that will have a change in what kinds of rhetoric you adopt. And that will be determined not by exceptional women who happen to flourish or be talented at the old male modes of debate, but that will be determined by the average woman in your legislature and the general tendency of the female sex and how it tends to argue. So there's just a huge difference between individuals and groups and generalizations.
A lot of people hear.
All right, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about this one, the difference between the individual and the group. And this is something that, ladies, I think we can do better at. We are very self-focused and we talk about us or we talk about the exception. How many women are still holding on for Sierra's prayer when there is one Russell Simpson? I think that's his name. Men think collectively, the group, community, society, they think legacy over decades and centuries. All right. So when you are in conversation with a man or in relationship with a man, and it's just like, well, I know somebody. How many times did we hear Kevin Samuels try to talk to a woman and, well, I know somebody or I heard of? That doesn't change the fact that our nature collectively as women will change things. Now, again, you can argue if it's better or worse, but what she said in the example of Margaret Thatcher, you will have some exceptional women that are going to excel in men's spaces. And that's fine. But I think just like as immigrants, when we come to this country, it is our job to assimilate into what was already established here. It is not for us to come in and change it the way that we want to. If you're going to be one of those exceptional women, and I know several, you're going to play by the rules that were already there. But when you bring the average women, now we have, just because Sierra had, a child out of wedlock, now we think all women that are, single mothers or have illegitimate children should be given the Sierra treatment. That is where we mess up, ladies, because there may be a one-off. There may be an exceptional exception, but that is the exception and not the rule. So be very mindful of that. What would you add, Lucy?
I agree. We are masters are pulling the exception, before the rule. I know that one person that 10 years ago was very successful doing what right now we see 20 million people not being successful at. And, we can see that happening in that, these younger women saying that they're going to be millionaires by putting themselves out there in the only fools environment. And then because they have seen that one person that made herself a millionaire, and now they're going to, suffer greatly for doing something that silly because they decided to think that they were also going to be the exception to the rule.
Absolutely. So, ladies, what can you do? Then we'll get to the last clip. Take a moment and observe, objectively observe. You may know one person that won the lottery, but like Kevin would ask women, is that a good retirement strategy? When you look around, when you look at the collective, when you look at most men, when you look at most women, when you look at most of these spaces, is that something that you can hang your hat on? We have men on Instagram that was talking about, more women are in college, but that means more women are carrying the debt now. All right. So again, if we want men to take us on, should we be saddling them with that just because we know somebody who started a law practice? Yeah, but do you have what it takes? Everybody wants to be Beyonce or whatever. Are you willing to perform and do all that stuff? Most of us are not, if we're being honest with ourselves. Okay. So the last clip that I want to go through is she talked about what we prefer versus what is good for all of us, or from her perspective. All right. And then we will wrap it up. So that is at the 27. And this is 2 minutes. So I'm just going to let this play and then we'll close it out.
Oxford debating society atmosphere, which alienates ordinary voters. That's normally the phrase you hear. And they're delighted that the discourse is a little bit more comprehensible and straightforward, or fact-based, or substantial, or whatever. Do you take a different view then? You think we should be trying to get back to that more rambunctious style?
I absolutely do. And in that case, I think it's important for anyone to always separate your own preferences from what is objectively good or bad. It's certainly the case that I prefer the old rambunctious style of debate. But I like to think that I'm able to separate these things and step back and say, well, okay, that's what I would prefer, but what is good for democracy? What is good for the country? And having thought about it and attempted to be objective, I think it's true that the old rambunctious style of debate was better able to handle conflict. Another example is university departments. There are lots of people who look at English departments now or say it's great that history departments are focusing more on traditionally female lines of inquiry. We do more social history now and feminist history now, talking about ordinary people. And we don't do so much military history or kings and queens anymore. That's the old stuff. And I think the rise of women in history departments has been a big factor in that change. But I look at the kind of social history that these departments produce and I think, well, this is not actually very good. And I think that if you have history departments that don't have any respect for military history or traditionally male fields of history, that's bad. And I will stand on this position resolutely. I think that is not just a matter of my own personal preference of the kinds of history that I like to read, but I think that's, objectively true of history departments in general. We have lost something if history departments become feminized, when parliamentary debate becomes feminized, when all of these things become feminized. The institutions just don't work as well.
All right, you all. So I know she was talking about debates and parliament, but the takeaway that I want you ladies that are interested in marriage and family to take from this is, especially with the men that we admire and respect, like Lucy says, they are honorable and men are willing to sacrifice for the greater good, the men that we want. So ask yourself if the institution, the experience, whatever you're going through, this fight, this trip I need to take, this car I need to have, this big house I need to have, is that what I want? Is that what I prefer? Is that just good for me? Is that going to make mama happy so everybody else can be happy? Or is that better for the group? Is that better for our family? Is that better for our legacy? Is that better for the community? So ask yourself, all of these changes that are happening, we've established them. If we feminize all of these things that have kind of functioned in a certain way and they become woman-led, is that better for the group? And you can ask yourself if that's going to be what you want, or do we want to hold on to some of those traditions that have brought us to where we are today? Lucy, what would you say to close us out?
Thank you all for participating in the chat. Thank you, Maggie, for interpreting some of the stuff that was a little more university bound language that I remember in school. When I heard that, I was probably already thinking about what I was going to do after I left the classroom. So again, it's fascinating to hear this woman talk. I really think it goes back to us women appreciating how men do things. I would love to be, in a parliament just watching the back and forth between men and the things that they probably tell each other. Again, being a fly on a wall at a barber shop, to hear how, to understand that it's a different way of communication and they bond differently than we do. So again, I think it was a great topic. Thank you, Maggie, for sharing it, and thank you, Chad, for putting your spin and your comments in there, because it always helps.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a good one, Lucy. So this one was a bit academic, but we didn't finish the video, y'all. There's some spaces at the end. If you want to watch this and listen to what she would do, the future as she would paint it, you can watch the video. It's linked in the description. I wanted to end it here because for me, this is really about what can we learn from this? What can we observe about what's happening? And you always hear us say that we are better together because we aren't equal. But if we can understand our differences and accept our man's differences, that is how your relationship can last the test of time, when you're working together and not against each other, because we want them to do it the way we do it and they want us to do it the way they'll do it. That has never worked in the history of man or marriage or relationships. All right, so are we skipping next week, Lucy?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem at all, y'all. We are here until we are not. All right, so just set your notifications, because things happen in the real world and life is happening for all of us. So we will be back in a couple of weeks with another reaction. And I truly hope that this was helpful. And until then, we will say
Adios.
adios.